Okay, are we recording?
That's the problem.
Strength is good, accuracy.
What do you say, Sholem?
Rob, I'm starting to record.
I saw you driving your work and I was telling you away no, before guys, I saw you. And I was meeting you and maybe you ignored me. He even slowed down.
If it's art scroll, it's over there. Art scroll, it's over there. Safaria is 40.
Okay, the numbers of verse.
21. 21 in Safaria. Yeah.
Kansas. We're going to go.
Okay.
And we Marcus works.
So we got it. So there we go. He wants the answer.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Are we ready? Are we ready to roll, Michael? Should we go for it? Always ready.
What's for the store?
Oh, okay, no problem.
For the store.
Put a context in.
What's for the?
Yeah.
Did you say 21, right?
41, 20, yeah, where's the verse 21? It's I think it's 42.
No, it's Safari. You're on Safari.
Yeah. It says it's the marking is 21.
In the chapter?
At the top is it's 42A 21. 42A then 21. If you actually, if anybody, Charles, if you want to go in with Safari, you can on the phone. If that's easier, then whatever you prefer, or the book.
What is our what Mishnah? What is our 42?
Talmud 42A21. All the other ways to come in, you can come into the Zoom because I put the text on the Zoom.
Bring them all home.
Gentlemen, let's kick off. Sorry.
I like this group. I'm gonna send it to you, Mark.
Not
everything without the ANC.
I'm gonna start over there. I float around in my. We did read this, but I'm gonna just go over it. Yeah, just for a starting point. Okay. Are we ready to roll? Has everybody got the place? Yeah, we're gonna once everyone has a place. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Benj. Thank you, Benj.
The whiskey one.
I want to go through
It can be sorted, 100%. 100%.
Jeez, I see a lot of
Name of that.
Good night. Good night, 23 years. Enjoy. Gesundheit. What's the wedding anniversary?
Who's doing?
Who's with you?
So that is your type of shows.
Who's your Shabbos?
It's coming Shabbos.
Coming Shabbos. So what would that be? Is that the 5th of Kislev? Hey, 5 Kislev.
What is this?
I'll make a note. What's that 5th? Okay. So we have in mind our soldiers. We're learning Torah together, and we have in mind that will catch it afterwards. We have in mind the soldiers. Hashem should give them strength and success. And
we have in mind the captured, the injured,
to heal the injured, comfort the bereaved,
You're right. Bring Mashiach.
and end sorrows. Bring Mashiach. It's enough. Enough with the tzoros, enough with the difficulty.
Get the plate of the rabbi.
That's a good idea. And a special bracha for Shlomo Leib ben Etel, Rabbi Shlomo Weiner. Should be gesund.
Rabbi Weiner.
And Gila.
Shlanga, I know him. From Pretoria. What's wrong with him?
Not sure the mother's name. We'll find it out.
Was he sick?
Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll just give a little bit of context and then we'll go into the actual text. Just to give everybody a starting point so that we don't find ourselves in the deep end, treading water. So basically, and maybe we're actually approaching the Mishnah. We're getting very close to the Mishnah, which concludes this discussion. But there are 2 or 3 last parts to the current discussion that we've been in. Not to worry if you missed some of the sessions, because we can explain the context so that nobody has to feel out of it. The general topic over here is about avodah zarah, which means statues, ornaments, anything that was produced for idolatrous purposes, idolatrous worship, and most specifically that a Jew is not allowed to have benefit from these things, that there is an isur hana, prohibition to have benefit from something that was made for idol worship, is used for idol worship. So because of the fact that it was designated, made for idol worship and utilized for idol worship, so it becomes something that's completely prohibited. We can no longer, as a Jew, benefit from it, has to be destroyed or gotten rid of. And then on a more specific level, we started to talk about how does something lose or gain that status. So it gains the status if that was the reason it was made, or if a Gentile, if a non-Jew, or even a Jew sadly worships what he shouldn't. The mere worship of something like that gives it its status as avodah zarah. And then we started to discuss and say that if something breaks, then the broken thing and the broken pieces are not necessarily avodah zarah anymore. It's good to catch the context also for chazara, for revision. So once something breaks, it could be that it no longer has its status of avodah zarah. Why? Because if the goy, the Gentile, broke it, normally, often when people nowadays, besides for rubbish or garbage, you've got a lot of what's called recycling going on. People divide up the plastic and the glass and the clay and whatever, and then they try to figure out what you can use the bottle for afterwards or the caps for afterwards. In the recycling process, people often either crush things or break them or grind them. It's all to show that you're no longer going to use it for such and such a purpose. You're going to use it for another purpose instead. And the Gemora had pointed out that when Gentiles who use something for avodah zarah, for idolatrous purposes, decide to break it, to dismantle it, to prepare it to be dumped or recycled, that shows that they don't intend to use it for avodah zarah anymore, and it revokes its status. So even though a Jew initially wouldn't have been able to benefit from it, once it's been broken, you can benefit from it. Furthermore, if pieces broke off something that was avodah zarah, it might be that the pieces become permitted. So for instance, if something was made of some kind of material and you wanted to use that material for another purpose, besides for the purpose it was made for, you want to use it for another purpose. You want to melt the plastic or grind the metal or whatever it is. Maybe you're a jewelry manufacturer and you can turn the dust again. You can reroute it and repurpose it back into something else. So shavings could be okay if they were sanded or off, even though maybe the original ornament was avodah zarah. There could be certain contexts or situations where the shavings or the pieces or the breakage could be okay. And today's Gemora actually will discuss not only physical things, but things like trees. In the days of old, they used to designate certain trees for idolatrous purposes. The most famous of these is what is called in the Pasuk, it's called in the Torah an Asherah, which was a particular type of idolatrous tree or plant. And the Pasuk says, Lo tia lecha Asherah, lo sita lecha Asherah kol eitz Eitel Mizbach Hashem Elokecho, you shouldn't plant an Asherah near the altar of Hashem your God. If such a tree, again, just like with the statues, was designated as an idolatrous thing, again, it becomes prohibited for a Jew to benefit from it. And such prohibition remains in place until the Gentile himself revokes the status. He says, I don't believe in this anymore. I'm going to prune it and use its branches or its leaves for another purpose in my farm, in my place. I'm going to give my animals to eat from here. I'm going to grind it. Then that breaking action may change the status of that tree, and suddenly it becomes permissible to benefit from it. And then we had reached a place in the Gemora where there was an argument between two, they're actually brother-in-laws as personalities in Gemora, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. They had a debate, an argument over Avodah Zarah shenishtabra me'eleha, anything in Avodah Zarah that broke on its own. Why? Because the question was whether an accidental breakage is the same as a purposeful, willful one. With a willful one, we know if the guy smashed his own idol, then it means he doesn't want to serve it anymore. But if it broke on its own, maybe he wasn't happy with what happened. Maybe he wants to use the leftovers for Avodah Zarah too. We don't have that advantage of knowing that he for sure did it with a willful or purposeful intent not to respect it as idolatrous anymore. And on that subject, Avodah Zarah shenishtabra me'eleha, idolatrous statues or ornaments or artifacts, whatever there might be that broke on their own. This is where a debate ensued about a few pages back between these two sages. Rabbi Yochanan said it's not good enough because it broke on its own. Not necessarily is the status revoked. And Resh Lakish said that it is okay because it broke. But you remember the logic that he said was that when a person sees that something he held as a deity can't hold itself together, he no longer has respect for it. Even if he was silly in the beginning to think that this was some kind of spiritual power, but once it couldn't even protect itself from, I don't know what, falling off the table, surviving the hailstorm if it was outdoors, or whatever it is, he says to himself, I'm not interested anymore if it didn't have the correct. And this was the argument that they had. Based on this argument, the Gemora started, it's a very common Talmudic pattern to, how would you call it, shoot arguments at one or the other opinion. And that's what we've been going through, where the Gemora will try to contrast what they're saying over here with other cases, other examples that are being said in other places. And it will try to, it's like almost a court argument, try to say, how can you say that if it broke on its own, it's okay? Here it seems that something that broke off on its own is not okay. And most of the questions, funnily enough, were lodged against Resh Lakish. There is one or two coming up just before we get to the end of this piece, which are lodged against Rabbi Yochanan as well. But most of them seem to be against Resh Lakish. The one that we're up to, and they all carry a very similar pattern. We did start reading it last week, but for the benefit of a little bit of chazara, a little bit of backtrack is always good for revision purposes. He talks about the concept of an Asherah tree, as we were talking about earlier on. And it bases itself on a Mishnah that says an Asherah tree, again, it was a tree. The tree might have stood in neutral territory, neutral property. There might be extra issues if the tree is in somebody's property. What do you do if somebody designated a tree as an idolatrous tree and they're serving it and then you find out and it's in your property? That could be a bigger challenge. What do you do? But in this case, it seems that the tree is in some kind of neutral property. And some people who have this religion where they designate or make the tree a deity, they go and they serve that tree and they designate it. But there's also an opportunity to, there's land, there's ground under the tree, which different people can take a patch and grow produce. They can grow vegetables. The vegetables or what are to be grown under the tree would benefit from the shade that the tree offers. Now you've got a problem. If the tree is designated avodah zarah, designated idolatry, as an idolatrous tree, you as a Jew can't benefit from its shade, because if you put plants under that, and those plants are different kinds of plants, some plants benefit a lot from the protection of a tree from shade. If your plants benefit from such shade, then you have a problem, because you will now be benefiting from a tree that is avodah zarah, unless for any reason he claps his tree, he prunes it and says that he's revoking its status, you have a problem with that. So there's a Mishnah or a quote somewhere which says that you have to watch the seasons. It almost sounds like it's an agricultural thing, because there are certain seasons where the shade is more important and there'll be shade. It all depends on the position of the sun and the season and how strong the sun is, how badly you need the shade to grow the produce. So the main subject of that Mishnah is about that you have to be careful. You have to be careful about planting during seasons where you benefiting from the shade, more like summer or spring seasons where things are very hot and you benefiting from the shade. You must be careful. You can't plant things there. It would seem that if it's winter, which in many parts of the world is actually the rain season, unlike Gauteng over here, we can get a bit confused. But in most parts of the world, your Mois Hagashamim, your Mot Hagashamim is winter. That's when it rains and that's when it's cold. And that's where there'd be snow and hail and all these kind of things. So generally over there, it was said that if it's winter time and it's cold and people aren't worried as much about the need for shade in order to grow things, you can be less worried about planting your stuff under the Asherah because you don't need the shade that it's offering. So you're not benefiting. But then Rabbi Yossi came along and said that you have to worry even in the winter, even in the rain season. Why? Because he said there's another problem besides shade. He said, what happens if the tree drops leaves? I think anyone that looked at the aftermath of the storm now would know that when there's a storm, the trees shed a lot of stuff. And the stuff that the trees shed, if you don't sweep it away, can very quickly turn into compost. They can turn into fuel for the ground and the plants and the produce and whatever's there. So Rabbi Yossi said that if you plant your yerakos, your vegetables, your produce under this Asherah tree, in the rain season, the tree, which is an idolatrous structure, is now going to drop its leaves down over your produce and feed your produce. So your produce will be fed from an Avodah Zarah tree, and you'll benefit. Never mind shade. You're now going to benefit from the leaves, from the plant material that comes off the tree. That is what he says over here. If we read it inside, that line, Eisrei Rabbi Yossi Omer, the objection is raised that Rabbi Yossi said, Af lo yerakos b'mois hageshamim, even vegetables in the
He didn't put glass, he forgot. He didn't put the tree.
Oh, you thought it was covered? There's the glass. So even in the time of rain, you have to worry. Even vegetables or crops at the time of the winter should not be planted under the Asherah tree, because the foliage, the pieces from the tree, we've got a full-on expo outside of what we're talking about. The thingamajigs, the leaves, the pieces of plant that fall down will fall. I think it's foliage. It means anything on the tree that's, but the leaves and the stuff together leaves. Sometimes you get your little berries. I've got in my yard a peppercorn tree, so the actual peppercorns fall down. Or the berries or the acorns or the whatever it is that's there, they'll fall down. And if they fall down, they will, Talmud uses some very interesting words. Besides for Hebrew and Aramaic, in words you can find some very interesting words. But the bottom line is it will compost or fuel what you've got growing under there. So the question over here is, Amai, says the Gemora, why is it a problem, the leaves? If you're going to say, like Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, that broken idols or broken pieces are okay, then that's what these things are. They're broken pieces of the tree. Just like if you smash an idol that's an ornament and you've got broken pieces. Let it be like idolatrous things, objects, that broke on their own. Resh Lakish had said that idolatrous things, the statue falls, breaks, it gets hit by lightning, whatever it is, once it's broken and cracked in pieces, it's the pieces are no longer a problem. Well, these are pieces of a tree. So why should they not be okay? Isn't this a question on Resh Lakish's opinion? Why did he say that which breaks on its own is okay. Here it seems it's not okay. You're not allowed to use this stuff. So the Gemora suggests an answer. Shiny Hassam, it's different over there. The Ikar Avodas Kechavim Kayemes, because the main object of idol worship remains fully intact. Gemora always tries to suggest answers, and sometimes those answers can get shot off as well. But the suggested answer is that if we're talking about a statue or an ornament or some type of avodah zarah, that the whole thing disintegrates and breaks, that's revoking the status. There's nothing left that's substantial. But if something remains there, like if you take an Asherah tree, it's an idolatrous tree, the lack of some leaves, even if it's a lot of them, that the tree is still standing. The Ikar avodah zarah, the main avodah zarah is still there, and says the Gemara, that's the problem. Normally, breaking on its own would be okay, but it's got to break properly. The whole tree's got to come down. That also sometimes happens. Shani Hassam, it's different to Ikar avodas kechavim kayemes, because the main structure of idolatry is still there. So on this, the Gemara asks a question. Hold on a second. Let's contrast this against what we said a page back. We said that shavings of a statue are okay. What's the difference between shavings of a statue that some craftsman shaves off and leaves off a tree? We had said already that if he is taking his whatever little sandblasting machine or sandpaper machine, and he's trying to shave down this ornament, this idol, because now he's going to varnish it or put, I think they call it lacquer in a different color. You can use the shavings because the shavings are now broken pieces of this avodah zarah, and there we said it's okay. So what's the difference between the shavings and the statue still avodah zarah, it's still there, or the foliage and the tree is still there? In the words of the Gemora, Bacher puyan, the shavings, the ikar avodas kechavim kayemes, where the main original substantial statue of idolatry is still there. V'katani, and we learned in a Mishnah, letzarka, if you shave it down for its purposes, you're trying to fix it or beautify it. We said there, he asura, the statue itself, remains an idolatrous instrument and is prohibited. But there we said, v'shipuyeho mutarin, the shavings themselves are permissible. They're like broken, their status as being part of it is revoked. But here with the leaves, you don't want to allow that. You want to say that the leaves still have a status of avodah zarah, even though they fell off. So the Gemara answers and says the reason why is because when we talk about breakage, we're not talking about something that happens naturally. When something occurs naturally, then it is come sit down. Yeah, come sit down.
They live on the floor.
So, continuing over here, Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua Omar, Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua explains, idolatrous artifacts are not nullified derech gedilasa in the natural way that they grow. If it's the natural way that they grow, they're not nullified. So in other words, when we talk about breakage, what is breakage if you define it? Breakage is not a natural process. Somebody comes along and breaks something. But when something happens as a result of a natural occurrence, a tree loses its leaves, even if it's from a storm, in normal situation, we're not talking about an abnormal storm. You know, it's almost like if you talk to the insurance after tonight, you might tell them it wasn't a natural storm. It might have hit a few places that usually would survive and not leak. But you can have a natural situation, and a person has to design and build things that in a natural scenario, there would be no damage. With trees and plants and all of that too, there's the same thing. You could have a situation that the fact that the trees shed their leaves in autumn, whether it's because of a bit of wind and rain as well, it's a natural process. It sheds its leaves, it becomes bare, and then a new season comes and it regenerates. It degenerates and then it regenerates. That's a natural process. What the Gemora wants to say, Rav Yeshua explained, that when the revocation of Avodah Zarah will not happen as a result of a natural process. A natural process is not destructive. Rav Huna Breder Amal Afisha and Avodas Kechavim B'Teila, it does not become nullified derech gedilasa by means of its natural method of growth. And that's why these leaves that fall off this tree are not constituted of something that lost their status of Avodah Zarah. They are still Avodah Zarah because they fell off a tree, and they fell off the tree in a natural process. And a natural process is not going to stop the effect of Avodah Zarah. So that basically is how the Gemora answers this. This is how the Gemora deals with it, that at the end of the day, Rabbi Yossi said that you can't plant your crops under such a tree because there is this risk that the leaves or other thingamajigs on the tree are going to fall down. They will enhance your crops. You will benefit. You're not allowed to benefit because the thingamajigs that fall down are coming from a tree that is idolatrous. That's Avodah Zarah. Why is it not a problem? Even though they've fallen off the tree, they've broken, because that's not called breaking. That's a natural process. It's a process of nature. A natural process of nature, derech gedilasa, does not constitute breakage, and it doesn't revoke the status. The tree remains a tree that was served, designated as Avodah Zarah. The things that fall off it remain designated as Avodah Zarah, but you can't benefit from it. That's why you don't plant your crops under it. Then the Gemora moves to another one, which is the last of these ideas that have to do with this particular argument, with the subject. Similar, but not exactly the same. In the next one, we'll just give a bit of an intro outside so that it's clearer inside. The Gemora talks about, in this case, it quotes a passage or a brisa about a nest that birds have put at the top of a tree. Birds have now gone and they've woven, or whatever the word is, they've gone and made a nest on the top of a tree. Now, if the tree is an Asherah, is a tree that's designated for idolatrous purposes. Idolatry. Yeah. Idolatry. Okay.
Really, you need Israeli to tell you that.
So it's an idolatry tree. The question is, what is the status of the nest? Is the nest separate from the tree? Is it part of the tree? And how do you deal with the nest? What if somebody wants to benefit from the nest or its contents, but the nest was built on a tree? And in fact, the Mishnah that discusses this actually discusses two things, which are actually in a way different, and but in the way the same. One case is where the tree is actually the opposite of idolatry. It's hekdesh. The other thing is, when somebody designates something as holy or hekdesh, in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, people could actually consecrate something and say, this belongs to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple. This is kodesh Lashem, it's holy. And then there became very special laws. You weren't allowed to just use it in any kind of ordinary, mundane way. It belonged to the temple. It was for use in the temple. It had to be taken there. What if somebody dedicated a tree to hekdesh? He said that this particular tree, which belongs to me, is now designated and dedicated to hekdesh. Maybe the field or the plot got sold. Somebody else bought everything else. But one thing he's got over there is a tree that's dedicated to hekdesh. So maybe down the line, he can have the tree removed and have its wood and its fruit and everything taken to the right place. He might be able to redeem it, figure out what the value is. But at the end of the day, the way it worked with hekdesh is that one had to be careful of a wrongdoing called me'ilah. It sounds almost like a Yom Kippur davening, but not with a nun, with a mem. Me'ilah. Me'ilah was a concept where a person was liable for misuse of consecrated items. If a person used something because he didn't know that it had been consecrated, it had been designated or dedicated for the temple, for the Beit HaMikdash, and he used it, that would be contravening the rules of Me'ilah. And it would be a particular kind of sin, which required a particular kind of remedy. In some cases, you had to pay double or 4 times as much, or sometimes 20% above the capital that was misused. There is a whole set of laws about Me'ilah, that's misuse of hekdesh. So this particular Mishnah discusses a tree that was designated for holy purposes for the temple. And more specifically, there's a nest on the tree. What's the status of the nest? What are the status of the chicks or the eggs that are in the nest? If you can't use the tree because of Hekdesh, what about the other things in it? Then, believe it or not, the same passage discusses a tree that's an Asherah at the same time. So now the laws might be similar. The Asherah tree you can't benefit from because it's a tree of idolatry. That's why it's prohibited to benefit from it. The tree that somebody designates to Hekdesh, you can't benefit because of the fact that it's Hekdesh. And this is the story that is raised over here. In this case, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish poses a question to Rabbi Yochanan. He raises an objection to Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Based on the fact, you, Rabbi Yochanan, said that broken pieces of Avodah Zarah that break on their own retain their status. They don't lose their statuses as Avodah Zarah. So may I ask you, he says, this case scenario. Kain Sheba Reisha Ilah. A bird's nest that's at the top of a tree shall Hegdish, which is Hegdish. What the Mishnah, the sages ruled, it's a very interesting ruling, and the Gemora will discuss why, is that the nest is not necessarily part of the tree, but at the same time, it does have a connection. So what they said, they took a bit of a middle of the road approach. They didn't say you definitely can't use it. They didn't say you definitely can. They said loy nenin, which means you may not benefit from this nest. In other words, lichatchila, that means the best option, keep away from it, don't touch it. You may not benefit. However, if you did, let's say you didn't know, somebody was working for you and thought you are allowed to use it, so he pulled it down for whatever purpose, to make a fire, whatever it was. V'loy moyalin, you're not considered to have contravened the laws of Me'ilah by using it. So first option is not to use it. In other words, it would be almost like the rabbis ruled, be careful, don't use it because we don't know the status. But if you did, you didn't do anything wrong. We can't for sure say that that nest is part of the tree, and just like the tree is designated Hegdish, the nest is designated Hegdish. Then the same rabbis in that same passage spoke about an Asherah tree as opposed to a Hegdish tree. They said, Baroisha shel Asherah, let's say you've got a nest at the top of an Asherah tree. They had a different approach. They said, Yatiz Bakane. You can't climb the tree to get it because climbing is already considered some form of recreation. They don't want you climbing on the Asherah tree. But they said, Yatiz Bakane, you can take a long pole and you can knock the nest down with a pole. And if you can get the nest down without getting involved with the tree, then you can benefit from the nest once it falls down on the ground. So take your, what do they say? Most gardens have the swimming pool pole. And how'd you call it? So hopefully no gardens have an Asherah tree. But get the nest down from the Asherah tree. And once you get it down without climbing the tree, you can benefit from the nest. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish's question. Sorry?
Not from a hectare.
Yeah, the Hekdesh tree, the advice was, the ruling was, don't get involved with it. You can't benefit. If somebody did, we can't prosecute
So
them.
the nest was a hectare, you could knock it off.
Yeah, you shouldn't. But if somebody did, what's done is done. They're not liable. With an Asherah tree, they said clearly, knock it down, enjoy once you've knocked it down. You can use it. Even as a, how would you call it, willful option. Now, he's unpacking this. He says, let's talk about this for a moment. How was the nest made? Sometimes the bird flies around the field, picking twigs and grass from all different trees and builds a nest on one particular tree. But the material of the nest is not necessarily from that tree. He's just using a parking space on the branch. Or another possibility is, we might need our bird experts over here, that it's not only that he's using that tree to build his nest, he's using twigs and mostly material from the tree. If the material is not from the tree, then the connection between the nest and the tree is obviously less because he's not using material from the tree. The fact that somebody designated the tree Hekdesh does not for sure have an effect on the nest. So Resh Lakish says, I originally want to assume, we work on assumption, that the bird literally took wood and material from that tree, and made himself a nest in the tree from the tree. V'kotani yatis b'koneh. And even so, we still say that you can take a pole and take down that nest. And if you take down the nest, you can benefit from it. Resh Lakish's question to Rabbi Yochanan is, why can you benefit from the nest? If the nest was made from that tree, it's material from a tree that was an Asherah, that is an Asherah. The material of that nest should be idolatrous material, designated idolatrous material, just like the tree itself. Why are you allowed to use it? The only answer could be because it's a broken piece of the tree. He disconnected it from the tree. It's like anything else that broke. Isn't it the case that if something breaks off Avodah Zarah, then it's okay? The status is revoked. The Resh Lakish is saying to Rabbi Yochanan, this shows that even if it broke on its own, a bird is like on its own. It wasn't me, it wasn't you, it wasn't the owner. It was a bird, it was nature, who came along and broke it off the tree. He took pieces of tree and broke them off and made a nest. And here it says, you can use that nest, you can enjoy it, you can benefit from it. So Resh Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan answers and he says, no. That case was talking about where it's clear that the nest was made from material that came from another tree. Rabbi Yochanan will argue, those birds brought that material from somewhere else. The Kinsaboyna made a nest. That's why it's okay. If the nest and its materials came from that tree, breaking off wouldn't help. You wouldn't be able to use it. The reason why you're able to benefit from that nest is because the materials that the birds used to create that nest, they picked off other trees, which weren't Asherah. So even though the tree is an Asherah tree, it's an Avodah Zarah tree, but the truth of the matter is the material didn't come from that tree. The material came from another tree. The birds went and made a nest. The weavers like to pick certain kinds of leaves, normally palms. They strip them down, and you might see that they're using that leaf on that tree.
Actually, the benefit is that the trees allow them to make the nest. Therefore, you can have your eggs.
Right, but that's a benefit while the nest is on the tree. If the nest comes off the tree, why shouldn't we? He's going to talk about the scrambled eggs. We get in there. Daikonami, the Gemora says, the language of the Mishnah is also precise in this regard. In other words, sometimes the Gemora will comment that the logic that is being expressed here is reinforced by the language of the passage. Daikonami, you can see by the preciseness of the terminology that this logic that the materials must have come from another tree is true. Why? Because the same passage, the same speech spoke of a Hegdish tree and an Asherah tree. And what did we learn by Hegdish? The Katani Gabe Hegdish, we learned in the Mishnah by Hegdish, by the tree that was consecrated for holiness, Loi Nanin V'loi Moyalin. On the one hand, you may not benefit from the nest. On the other hand, you're not liable if you do benefit. If you want to suggest the that the bird's nest was made from materials or wood from another tree, that's why you've got this approach. That's why when the tree is consecrated, you've got this approach. Don't go and benefit from that nest, but if you do, then you did. Why? Is midrabanan. Don't benefit from it is a rabbinic injunction. The fact of the matter is the materials came from elsewhere. The tree is designated Hegdish or holy. The nest isn't. But the rabbis wanted to be careful. You know, it's on that tree, it's next to the tree. So they said, Loi nanin, don't benefit from it. V'loi moyalin, but if you do benefit from it, we can't hold you liable. You know why? Midoraisa, that's from the Torah. The Halei Kadisha, because that nest is not Hegdish. You can see in the approach that the rabbis took to the use of the nest when the tree is consecrated as Hegdish, that they're talking about a nest that the birds made from material that came from other trees, because that's why they said, on the one hand, you know, everything is like that. On the one hand, the materials came from other trees, but we want you to be careful. We're worried, you know, you get involved with a nest that's on a consecrated tree, you might end up using something else, some leaves might fall into the pot while you're busy shearing. So the rabbis say a rabbinic injunction, leave that nest alone. Why? The tree is consecrated to the temple. It's Hegdish. You know, when someone says, just be careful. Don't get involved over there. The rabbi said, but if somebody did, they didn't know better. They didn't know that that was a Hegdish tree and they did. Not a problem. You can't hold them liable. Why not? Because that nest is not Hegdish. The tree is hegdish, the nest isn't. Why is the nest not hegdish? Because the nest was made from materials that in fact come from another tree. But if you were to say that the birds actually made the nest from that exact tree, let's say you take it the other way around. Case scenario is if you want to suggest that the birds actually built the nest from material on the same tree, the kinsa bahen, and it made a nest there, then you'd be asking a question, why should it be that we tell the person you're not liable if you did it anyway? HaKadisha is hektish. If the birds made a nest from what grew on that tree, then the ingredients of the nest are hektish, are consecrated, just like everything else on the tree. So why do we tell the person that did it in error, you're fine, you're free, no problem? It is a problem. The nest is hektish, just like the tree. So Rabbi Yochanan, the question is still on Rabbi Yochanan. Why would that nest be hektish? So mid the area says the Gemora, this is not a proof, an argument, because Rabbi Yochanan would bring in another principle, another formula, another whole principle. Rabbi Yochanan would say that even if the nest was made from materials of that tree, it might have been made from material that grew after the tree was designated hektish. Basically, this talks to another principle. There's another principle that some people would say that if someone designated a tree hektish, now trees carry on growing. The tree might be that size, and then tomorrow it's that size, and another season comes and a new branch grows and a new twig and extra leaves. There's a view that when the tree was designated hektish, what was designated was the original tree. Anything else that grows, the extension, the growth of the tree that happens after it was designated hektish, that's not consecrated or hektish. In other words, if somebody bought the tree for a certain amount and you could calculate what the tree was worth at the time that it was designated hektish, you could take off the sum of improvement and you could say that the improvement is not hektish. Almost like
if it would be an animal and the animal now got a baby, then the baby is hektish or not hektish?
That could be a separate scenario. In
No,
other
but
words,
it's the same because the baby is of the tree.
According to this view, probably the baby would be the same like the extra. That maybe the baby would not be hektish. Possibly not.
I
Yes.
think it's not.
Possibly it's not. So basically, we're talking about a tree over here that grows. Yeah, possibly not. Let's say a person consecrates something to hektish based on its capital value. So what is consecrated? The capital value. Now the thing appreciates in value. It could well be that the appreciation in the value, according to one view, is no longer part of the hektish. The hektish is the original amount. So whoever designated the tree, made the area, it's not an argument. Hacha, we're talking with growth that comes afterwards. Askinon, that's what we're dealing with here. And he is of the opinion, Rabbi Yochanan would hold, there's no ma'ila in the extra growth. The answer to your baby born would be the same as this. For those people who say that the extension or the additional does not have ma'ila. So in other words, if this person designates this tree, this field, this whatever it is, and he says this is hektish, what is hektish, what's consecrated is its capital value as it stands today. What does the taxman call it? Capital gains. Any capital gain that occurs after that is not part of the hektish. So if somebody comes along and misuses that which was hektish, he wouldn't be considered misusing it if he only misused an amount that doesn't equate with the original amount that was hektish. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, when the bird built its nest, we were dealing with a case where the material that the bird used to build its nest was new material that came about on the tree after it was already declared hektish. That's why we're not worried about a person benefiting from that nest, because of the fact that that nest might have been made from twigs, plants, leaves of the tree, but not leaves, plants, twigs from the original capital value of the tree. Then the Gemora suggests another one. We've just got two more lines to get to the Mishnah, so that's why I'm rushing it. Rabbi Abo, Rabbi Yochanan, my yatis b'yafreichin. Rabbi Abo, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, has another take. He says the nest is a problem. The nest is the same as the tree. If the tree is hegdish, the nest is hegdish. If the tree is avodah zara and asherah, the nest is. When we talk about the nest, we're talking about chicks that are in the nest. The bird put eggs and chicks in the nest. The person is allowed to benefit from those. They don't have a connection to the tree. The nest is connected to the tree. The chicks and the eggs don't have a connection to the tree. And therefore, when we said that a guy could take his long pole and pull the nest down and benefit from it, we never meant the twigs or things that came from the tree. We meant the eggs and the birds that some bird arrived and definite. That's for sure new. That's a fresh, call it a fresh asset or a fresh growth. Nobody's going to say that that's part of the tree. That's additional to the tree. So Rabbi Abo says, my yat is, what did they say he could take off and benefit? He could benefit from the little chicks that are in that nest. The nest itself he cannot benefit from. And not only that, Amalei Rabbi Yaakov le Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, Rabbi Yaakov further unpacked this and explained it to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, that it depends how dependent the chicks or the eggs are on the tree. Asber alach, I'll tell you, be'afroichin kan, he says, in fact, eggs are not permissible because eggs are not independent of the tree. The bird laid the eggs in the nest. The nest is part of the tree. The eggs are part of the tree. They're all together. What is independent is a baby chick that was born from an egg and now can fly off. It's separate. It literally could fly off on its own. So kan v'kan mutarin, v'beitzim kan v'kan asurin. The chicks are permissible, the little birdies, but the eggs are not. And not only that, Amar Rav Ashi said, when we talk about chicks, that need their mother, they need the mother bird, they need to be in the nest, are like the eggs. So in other words, the tree is a problem, the nest is a problem, the eggs are a problem, they're all connected. The chicks that are born from the eggs, if they're dependent on the mother and still part of the nest and the tree, they're also a problem. If they can fly off on their own, if they're independent, then they're like any bird. When he's on a branch on a tree, he's not part of the tree. He's flying away in a second. And that's basically their view, that the nest is not allowed, the eggs are not allowed. It's only that once these little baby birds are independent and can fly away, they're separated from the tree. That brings us to the Mishnah. L'chaim.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. About the baby animal. Okay, so Ephraim wanted to know. Thank you. I'll have a little bit of that too. Ephraim wanted to know if somebody consecrated an animal for hekdesh, and then the animal gave birth, is the calf also hekdesh? So I think there would be an argument. It would seem just like with the tree. There's an opinion that if hekdesh produces hekdesh, then it is also hekdesh. But there's also an opinion that it's limited to what was designated by the person as hekdesh in the beginning, and not the growth.
It's not the list of how do you know which trees are
idolatrous asherahs. So nowadays, I think it's not common at all that trees are used for avodah zarah. But in the land of Canaan, it was very common. It was very common. Yeah. And it was based on them serving it. So it wasn't necessarily like a species of tree. But what got it in trouble was when they arrived there with their stuff and started to do the functionality of it. Yeah.
But isn't it you just look at the eggs? You know, when you see things about birds laying their eggs in the garden, we have a shul. In our garden at the flat, you mustn't go near those eggs. They start hissing at you.
Oh, those tall ones. They can actually come and peck you there.
Skin and it's got a leopard design on the body. I don't know.
It makes you look
like a small one. Anybody want to share this with me? This big piece.
No, Rabbi, enjoy it.
Rabbi, gesundheit.
Absolutely.
Did he have good
Absolutely.
All of his words.
Nice.
Whiskey. You have a whiskey.
15 years old.
I have the whiskey.
And I bought a Zorro.
It's different, surely.
The whiskey is good.